Only a fool trusts his life to a weapon. Well, that is, unless your whole body is the weapon. The goal here is to provide you, the viewer, with a richer Final Fantasy experience by exploring the many iconic jobs throughout the franchise's history. My name's Zeo, and I'll be your lore keeper. Today, we're taking a look at the monk. A warrior may be adept at using a wide range of weapons to eliminate their foes, but a monk achieves this with just their fists and their feet. Monks have a number of common traits throughout the series. They're known for their sturdy constitutions and proficiency with hand-to-hand combat. They're also known for using claw and fist type weapons. They also prefer light armor, which affords them greater mobility and range of motion. Pretty hard to do all that punching and kicking in a full suit of plate armor, if you know what I mean. Monks got their start in the very first Final Fantasy. Of course, Nintendo of America wasn't keen on religious references back in the day, so it was given the more secular name of Black Belt. Monks have exceptionally high HP and attack power. The downside? They have limited access to equipment, which means they have lower defense than other melee jobs. Later on in the game, they could upgrade into Masters. Final Fantasy III would see the monk return as one of the first jobs given to the player through contact with the Wind Crystal. The monks in this game were functionally identical to their counterparts in the first game. Monks would gain the Retaliate skill in the 3D remakes, which allowed them to counter oncoming attacks. Final Fantasy IV would give us the first named monk in the form of Yang Fong Leiden. In the original Super Nintendo release outside Japan, he was called a Karate Master. Yang hails from the Kingdom of Fabul, which is home to the Wind Crystal, protected by warrior monks. Yang is one of their strongest and most respected, but you wouldn't know that by talking to him. He's always very polite and humble. He's often seen training alongside his fellow monks. Yang has the ability to unleash a flying jump kick that hits all enemies on screen. He also has the brace and focus skills, which were cut out of the original Super Nintendo release. Brace reduces the amount of damage he takes, whereas focus lets him skip a turn, doubling his damage on the next turn. The job system makes a return in Final Fantasy V, where once again the monk is one of the first jobs made available through the Wind Crystal. Monks would have the kick ability like Yang in the previous game. Just like before, monks would have low defense and limited gear selection, but make up for this with their high HP and physical strength. They're also proficient in fighting barehanded, as well as countering oncoming enemy attacks. This would be the last iteration of the job system as we knew it for a while. Final Fantasy VI would give us Sabin René Figaro. Sabin is the younger twin brother of King Edgar of Figaro. Sabin left the country 10 years prior to the events of the game while Edgar assumed the throne after their father's death. He would then train under a martial arts master by the name of Duncan. Gear-wise, Sabin has access to claws and light armor. He also has the Blitz skill, which lets him perform special attacks by doing certain button inputs. He gains access to more of these skills by leveling up. Sabin is one of the strongest people in the world of Final Fantasy VI. He's known for holding up collapsing houses for several minutes. And of course, taking trains to Suplex City. Final Fantasy VII would introduce us to Tifa Lockhart. Tifa learned to fight under the tutelage of a martial arts master named Zangon in her hometown of Nibelheim. Tifa is part of the resistance group Avalanche in Midgar, where she would reunite with her childhood friend Cloud. Tifa uses claws and knuckle-type weapons and has the third highest potential strength. Her limit breaks chain together a series of physical attacks that hit or miss depending on slot reels. A few of these would come back in the remake, but the slot mechanic is gone. Final Fantasy VIII would introduce us to Zell Dinkt. Zell is a student at Balam Garden, a school that trains members of an elite mercenary force called Seed. Zell wanted to become a soldier like his grandfather, whom he deeply admired, so he joined Balam Garden at the age of 13 to train as a Seed. Zell is a consummate martial artist making use of fist weapons. Zell's limit break is called Duel, which unleashes special attacks by performing the correct button inputs, much like a fighting game. Final Fantasy IX brings us Amarant Coral. In the Japanese version, he's called Salamander, who is something of a monk-ninja hybrid. Amarant made a name for himself as a mercenary in the city of Torino before encountering Zidane and company. Amarant fights with claw-type weapons, and just like other monk-type characters, wears light armor. He can throw weapons at his foes, dealing heavy damage, much like the ninjas in previous games. He also has access to the Flare skill, which lets him use offensive or defensive abilities. After a decade's absence from the mainline titles, the job system would make its gallant return with Final Fantasy XI. Monk is one of the 6 jobs available at the start of the game, harkening back to the original. With their bodies that double as deadly weapons, Monk attacks enemies with explosive strength. Just like their predecessors, the Monks of Vana'diel excel at hand-to-hand combat. They're also handy with staves, should the situation call for it. Monks have traits that increase their effectiveness in hand-to-hand combat and allow them to counter any oncoming physical attacks directed their way. They also have abilities that increase their accuracy, evasion, and counterattack rate. Monks have come in and out of favor at endgame throughout the game's lifespan. In many cases, they fall behind their two-handed melee counterparts like warriors, dark knights, and samurai. On top of that, this is one of the few MMOs that let players experience the entire scope of the game with a single character. So of course developers are going to tailor certain fights around certain job configurations. The fighting style of a monk is a fusion of ancient Far Eastern tradition with Sandorian technique. Sandorian priests honed their skills in hand-to-hand combat, and one of their main training grounds was the Abbey in present-day Davoy. Well, that is before the orcs took over and turned it into their stronghold. The monk's artifact armor is a set of clothing presented to the students of an old Galka monk named Dogby. One of his most notable pupils was a young woman by the name of Cornelia who trained under him 30 years before the events of the game. Final Fantasy XII has a monk in the Zodiac versions of the game. Monks have access to light armor in addition to increased attack power while empty-handed. They also have access to a limited array of white magic. Snow Villiers would represent the monk job in Final Fantasy XIII. Snow's the leader of a neighborhood watch group called Nora and is the fiancé of Lightning's sister Sarah. Snow fights barehanded like a monk, but his weapons are trench cuts with different emblems on them that boost his strength. So now we come to its most recent mainline iteration in Final Fantasy XIV. Aspiring monks start off as pugilists upon taking their first steps in Eorzea. The Pugilist Guild in Ul'dah rose to prominence thanks to a legendary fighter named Cornelia who had developed their unique fighting style. Her exploits in the Blood Sands attracted would-be students from all corners of Eorzea. Once a pugilist gains enough experience, they gain access to the monk job. Monks are one of the first melee DPS jobs introduced in the game, going as far back as 1.0. Longtime monk players know the job has had its share of issues throughout the game's lifespan. The monks of Eorzea fight with their fists and their feet in lieu of heavy weapons. They're also capable of enhancing their allies' physical damage. In addition to their physicality, they make use of a special power called chakra. They achieve this by manipulating the ether in their environment and using it to their own will. This ether is especially dense in areas where great battles took place, so of course ancient battlegrounds would serve as popular meditation sites. The city-state of Alamigo once had the greatest military might in all of Eorzea. Among their ranks were the monks who comprised an order known as the Fist of Ralgar. The organization existed for some time until Garlemald took over Alamigo. This was during the rule of the Mad King Theodoric. The order grew very popular and even merged with the Alamigan military, but this didn't sit well with the Mad King who saw them as a threat, so he had everyone in the temple slaughtered. The few that survived this bloodbath found shelter in Ul'dah, one of them being a monk named Wiedergeld who had set aspiring warriors of light on the path to unlocking their chakras and mastering the ways of the monk. Just like the warrior, the monk takes a number of cues from Dungeons & Dragons. D&D monks are known for their prowess in unarmed combat, as well as gaining special powers through manipulation of mystical energy. We also can't ignore the countless pop culture depictions of Zen, Buddhist, and Taoist monks in the real world. No matter the incarnation, the monk is always a master of themselves and their environment, always training, growing ever stronger. If you enjoyed this, well, you know what to do. And of course, share with your friends. After all, sharing is caring, right? Let me know what job you'd like me to cover next. We have a surge of new people being introduced to Final Fantasy in light of recent events, and not just Final Fantasy XIV specifically. As always, thank you so much for watching, and for the continued support. And remember, to thine own self be true. Until next time, farewell.